Stel je voor dat je 6 jaar oud bent. Je woont in een groot wit huis, met 20 of 30 andere mensen. Je ouders zijn er ook, maar ze besteden meer tijd aan de man die zegt dat hij God is dan aan jou. Je gaat niet naar een normale school. Je speelt niet met kinderen uit de buurt. Je leert dat de buitenwereld evil is, dat dokters werktuigen van Satan zijn, dat alleen de mensen in dit huis de waarheid kennen. Dit was de realiteit voor tientallen kinderen die opgroeiden in het Witte Huis in Muiderberg tussen 1964 en 1968. Ze waren niet gekozen om daar te zijn. Ze waren geboren in Lou de Palingboers beweging of meegebracht toen hun ouders lid werden. En hun jeugd, die zou moeten zijn gevuld met spel, school, vriendschappen, normaliteit, was in plaats daarvan gevuld met indoctrinatie, isolatie, angst en vaak verwaarlozing. Sommige van deze kinderen zijn nu in hun 70ers en voor de eerste keer vertellen ze hun verhalen. Dit is het ware verhaal achter een jeugd in een cult. Van alle aspecten van Lou de Palingboers beweging is misschien de meest hartverscheurende de impact op kinderen die opgroeiden binnen zijn controle. Deze kinderen hadden geen keuze. Ze kozen niet om lid te worden van een cult. Ze werden erin geboren of erin gebracht door ouders die te geïndoctrineerd waren om te realiseren wat ze hun kinderen aandeden. Tussen ongeveer 1950 en 1975, inclusief de jaren na Lou's dood, toen Mien de beweging voortzette, groeiden naar schatting 40 tot 60 kinderen op binnen Lou's beweging op verschillende niveaus van involvement. Sommigen woonden fulltime in het Witte Huis. Anderen woonden thuis, maar brachten veel tijd door bij bijeenkomsten en activiteiten. Allen werden blootgesteld aan Lou's bizarre leer, zijn absolute autoriteit en de toxische dynamiek van cultleven. Vandaag, in 2025, zijn sommige van deze nu volwassenen bereid om te praten over hun ervaringen. Hun verhalen zijn moeilijk om te horen, maar essentieel om te begrijpen. Ze onthullen hoe cult-involvement schaadt niet alleen de volwassenen die kiezen om lid te worden, maar ook de kinderen die geen stem hebben, geen keuze, geen escape. Als je dit kanaal nog niet volgt, abonneer nu. We hebben meer dan 10.000 abonnees. Dit zijn verhalen die moeten worden verteld omdat kinderen die opgroeien in cults nog steeds een realiteit is in Nederland en wereldwijd. Door te begrijpen wat er gebeurde met deze kinderen, kunnen we mogelijk toekomstige kinderen beter beschermen. Laten we beginnen met het dagelijks leven in het Witte Huis voor een kind. Voor kinderen die opgroeiden in het Witte Huis was wat voor hen voelde als normaal, werkelijk diep abnormaal. Maar kinderen hebben geen vergelijkingspunt. Als je hele wereld een cult is, weet je niet dat je in een cult bent. Je denkt simpelweg dat zo leven is hoe iedereen leeft. Een typische dag voor een kind in het Witte Huis begon vroeg. Het huis was chronisch overcrowded, met 20 tot 40 mensen sharing beperkte ruimte. Kinderen sliepen vaak 4 of 5 in een kamer, op stapelbedden of mattrassen op de grond. Privacy was non-existent. Er was altijd noise, altijd mensen, altijd chaos. Ontbijt was communaal en vaak schaars. Voedsel in het Witte Huis was functional, maar niet abundant. Lou preekte over rejecting materialism en dat uitgestrekt naar eten. Maaltijden waren simpel. Brood, kaas, jam voor ontbijt. Soep en brood voor lunch. Aardappelen en groenten voor diner. Vlees was zeldzaam. Fruit was een treat. Kinderen waren vaak een beetje hongerig. Niet stervend, maar niet fully gevoed. Formele educatie was problematisch. Lou was deeply suspicious van public schools, die hij zag als institutions dat zouden indoctrineren kinderen in worldly values en secular thinking. Sommige kinderen gingen naar reguliere scholen, maar werden geïnstrueerd om zich te isoleren van klasgenoten, om niet vriendschappen te vormen, om niet deel te nemen in activities like sports of clubs. Ze werden taught dat ze waren special, different, dat andere kinderen couldn't understand them. Andere kinderen gingen helemaal niet naar reguliere school. Lou claimde dat hij en andere bewegingmembers konden provide better education. Deze education was primarily religious indoctrinatie. Learning Lou's teachings, memorizing zijn sayings, understanding zijn theology. Basic literacy en numeracy werden taught haphazardly door whichever volwassene had tijd. Het was geen systematic curriculum. Een kind might learn naar read reasonably well, maar have enormous gaps in kennis over geschiedenis, science, geography, basically anything that wasn't directly relevant naar Lou's worldview. Het result was dat kinderen uit het Witte Huis waren significantly achter hun peers academically. When some later tried to re-enter mainstream education, they struggled enormously omdat they lacked foundational kennis dat normale kinderen learned in elementary school. Spel en recreation waren ook beperkt. Lou believed that idle play was waste van tijd that could be spent in work of study van zijn teachings. Kinderen waren expected naar help met chores, cleaning, cooking, gardening, maintenance. Even young kinderen, 6 of 7 jaar oud, had assigned tasks. Dit was geframed as learning responsibility en contributing naar God's work. Maar effectively het was child labor. When kinderen had vrije tijd, ze speelden meestal met elkaar binnen het Witte Huis's grounds. Ze weren't allowed naar wandelen de buurt of interact met buurkinderen. The outside world was dangerous, vol van people who would mislead them, corrupt them, turn them away from truth. Deze isolation meant kinderen developed sociale skills only binnen de cultcontext. They didn't learn hoe naar navigate normal social situations, hoe naar maken vrienden met diverse people, hoe naar function in regular society. Discipline was strict and often harsh. Lou believed in absolute obedience. Kinderen who questioned, who misbehaved, who showed any independence of spirit, waren punished. Punishments ranged from verbal shaming in front van de groep naar physical punishment, slapping, hitting met belts of sticks, being locked in dark rooms for hours. This wasn't daily occurrence for every child, maar het was common genoeg that Alan lived in fear van displeasing Lou of other authority figures. Psychologically, children learned that questioning was dangerous, that obedience was paramount, that hun own thoughts and feelings were less important than what authority figures told them, naar think and feel. Deze is textbook conditioning, that creates compliant cult members, maar profoundly damages children's psychological development. Medically, kinderen received inadequate care. Lou's prohibition tegen doctors extended naar kinderen. When children got sick, they were prayed over maar not taken naar physicians unless the illness was so severe that zelfs deeply indoctrinated ouders became frightened. Deze meant kinderen suffered through illnesses that could have been easily treated. Dental care was non-existent. Vision problems went uncorrected. Chronic conditions were undiagnosed. Emotionally, kinderen weren't given the nurturing they needed. Ouders in cults zijn often so consumed met de demands van the movement that they neglect hun children's emotional behoeften. Een moeder might be more focused op pleasing Lou dan op comforting haar crying child. Een vader might spend al zijn tijd in movement work rather than playing met zijn kids. Kinderen learned that they weren't priority, that Lou's work was more important than they were. Deze created deep attachment issues that many van deze now adults still struggle met. When you grow up not feeling secure in your parents' love, not feeling prioritized, it affects your ability to form healthy relationships as an adult. The education kinderen received in Lou's movement was primarily ideological indoctrinatie, designed to create the next generation van loyal cult members. Understanding what kinderen were taught helps explain waarom some van them struggled for decades to deprogram themselves and waarom een few never fully escaped Lou's influence. Lesson 1. Lou is God. Dit was the foundational teaching. Van zeer young age, kinderen were told repeatedly that Lou de Palingboer was not just an special man, not just an prophet, maar literally God in human form. Questioning these was unthinkable. Doubting deze was sinful. Children learned naar bow when Lou entered a room, naar speak naar hem met reverence, naar treat his words as absolute truth. For young kinderen met developing brains, deze kind van indoctrinatie is especially effective omdat they don't yet have critical thinking skills naar evaluate such claims. Als all the adults around you say someone is God and you've never been exposed naar alternative viewpoints, you simply accept it. Lesson 2. The outside world is evil and dangerous. Kinderen were taught that everyone outside the movement was lost, deceived, possibly actively evil. Public schools were indoctrination centers for Satan. Doctors were evil. Regular society was corrupt. Television, radio, newspapers, all were tools van evil, naar mislead people away from truth. These teachings served dual purpose. It rationalized the movement's isolation and it made kinderen afraid van outside world, meaning they wouldn't seek naar escape, even if they could. If you believe everyone outside is dangerous, leaving seems terrifying rather than liberating. Lesson 3. Family loyalty is less important than loyalty naar Lu. Kinderen were explicitly taught that if they had naar choose between hun parents and Lu, they should choose Lu. Als hun parents showed any doubt, kinderen were encouraged naar reported naar Lu. Deze broke down family bonds and created atmosphere van surveillance and mistrust even within families. Some former members recount painful memories van being asked naar spy op hun parents, van being praised for reporting when hun mother said something skeptical, van being made naar feel that loyalty naar family was weakness. Lesson 4. Suffering is spiritual purification. When kinderen were hungry, uncomfortable, scared, sick, they were told these was good for them spiritually. Suffering purified the soul. Comfort was dangerous omdat it made you soft and vulnerable naar Satan's temptations. Deze teaching was convenient for justifying the neglect and harsh conditions kinderen lived in. It reframed deprivation niet as abuse, maar as character building. Kinderen internalized deze and felt guilty for wanting basic comforts, for crying when they were hurt, for wishing hun life was easier. They learned naar suppress hun natural needs and emotions. Lesson 5. Obedience is the highest virtue. Independence, creativity, questioning, exploring, all the things that healthy child development requires, were discouraged. Perfect obedience was what was valued. In good child was one who never questioned, never deviated, never showed any independent thought. Deze created kinderen who were superficially well-behaved, maar psychologically damaged. They learned naar comply without thinking, naar defer naar authority even when that authority was wrong, naar suppress hun own judgment. Lesson 6. Sex is simultaneously shameful and sacred, depending on context. Kinderen were taught that sexuality was evil and corrupt, except when it involved Lu, in which case it was sacred aanliggen ceremony that was spiritually elevating. These created profound confusion about sexuality. Kinderen sometimes witnessed or heard about Lu's sexual activities met women, which was presented as holy, but their own normal sexual curiosity was treated as sinful. This mixed messaging created deep shame about sexuality that many former members struggled met well into adulthood. They couldn't develop healthy attitudes toward intimacy omdat they'd been given such contradictory and unhealthy messages as kinderen. Lesson 7. You are special and chosen, maar also fundamentally inadequate. Dit paradox is common in cults. Kinderen were told they were special omdat they were part van Lu's movement, chosen, privileged naar no truth that others couldn't see. Maar simultaneously they were told they were sinful, weak, never good enough, always falling short than what Lu expected. These creates a psychological double bind. You feel simultaneously superior naar outsiders. We know the truth they don't know. And inferior naar authority figures. We can never be good enough for Lu. Deze pattern van grandiosity combined met deep insecurity is psychologically damaging and difficult naar overcome. Lesson 8. Modern medicine and science zijn lies. Kinderen were taught that doctors don't heal, they poison, dat vaccines zijn dangerous, dat hospitals zijn waar people go naar die, dat scientific explanations for natural phenomena zijn attempts naar deny God's Lu's power. Deze teaching had immediate harmful effects, kinderen not receiving medical care, and long-term effects, distrust van medical establishment that persisted into adulthood, making some former members hesitant naar seek help zelfs after leaving. Beyond the daily deprivations and twisted teachings, kinderen in het Witte Huis witnessed and experienced specific traumatic events that left lasting scars. Talking naar now adults who were daar als kinderen reveals several categories van trauma. Sexual abuse and exposure. Multiple voormalige child members report that they were exposed naar inappropriate sexual content at young ages. They witnessed Lou's aanliggen ceremonies, waar hij had sexual contact met women presented as a spiritual act. For young kinderen, seeing deze was confusing and disturbing, zelfs if they didn't fully understand what they were seeing. Some report that Lou touched them inappropriately under guise van blessing them. Others report that older cult members, emboldened door the sexual permissiveness around Lou, also behaved inappropriately toward kinderen. The climate van sexual boundary violation at the top created environment where other forms van sexual abuse could occur lower down. Importantly, kinderen had nowhere naar report deze. Telling parents might not help if parents were deeply indoctrinated. Telling outside authorities was unthinkable, omdat kinderen were taught. Outside authorities were evil. Kinderen were trapped met their trauma, unable naar seek help, witnessing violence and extreme punishment. Kinderen witnessed adults being humiliated, verbally abused, sometimes physically struck door Lou when Haj was angry. They saw hun own parents degraded, reduced naar tears, treated cruelly. For a child, seeing your parent, who should be your protector, being brutalized door someone else is profoundly traumatic. It shatters your sense van safety. Kinderen also witnessed other kinderen being punished harshly. One former member, Sophie, recounts watching Ian young boy being locked in a dark closet for hours omdat hij had stolen an apple from the kitchen. She could hear him crying and begging naar be let out. She was 7 jaar oud and had taught her that any disobedience could result in terrifying punishment. Medical neglect and avoidable suffering. Kinderen remember being sick and not receiving proper care. One man, Piet, developed a serious ear infection as a child. It wasn't treated omdat Lou forbade doctor visits. The infection eventually ruptured zijn eardrum, causing permanent hearing damage. Hij is now 72 and still partially deaf in one ear omdat van neglect he experienced as a 7-year-old. Multiple members recount dental problems that went untreated, vision problems uncorrected, chronic pain ignored. Deze wasn't occasional oversight, it was systematic neglect grounded in ideology, forced labor and exploitation. Kinderen as young as 6 or 7 were expected naar work significant hours. A woman, Anna, remembers spending summers vanaf age 8 working in the extensive gardens at het Witte Huis, often in hot sun, zonder adequate water of breaks. When she complained, she was told she was being selfish, omdat God required her naar work harder. Another former member recounts being taken out from school at age 14 naar work full-time in maintenance van het Witte Huis. Hij received no education beyond basic literacy and had no skills beyond manual labor when he eventually left the movement in zijn 20s. Psychological abuse and gaslighting. Kinderen were routinely told that hun feelings waren wrong, dat hun perceptions waren incorrect, that they couldn't trust hun own judgment. Als a child said, "I'm scared," they might be told, "No, you're not. You're being tested door God." Als a child said, "That hurt me," they might be told, "No, it didn't. You're being sensitive." Deze systematic denial van kinderen's reality is a form van gaslighting that profoundly damages one's ability naar trust one's own perceptions and feelings. Many former members report that even as adults they struggle met trusting hun own judgment omdat they were taught so young that they couldn't trust themselves. Separation from loved ones. Some kinderen were separated from parents for extended periods as discipline, of omdat parents were sent on missions for Lou. A child might be told hun mother was being sent naar help, establish a new group in another city, and wouldn't see her for months. Deze separations were traumatic and never adequately explained of softened for kinderen, witnessing complete parental subordination. Perhaps one van the most psychologically damaging aspects was watching hun parents completely subordinate themselves naar Lou. Kinderen saw hun parents, who should have been strong, protective figures, reduced naar fawning sycophants who cared more about Lou's approval than about hun children's well-being. One former member describes the moment when hij was sick, met high fever, en zijn mother wanted naar take hem naar een dokter, maar Lou voorbaarde het. Zijn mother complied. In that moment, hij says, I realized my mother would let me die rather than disobey Lou. How do you ever trust your parent again after realizing that? These witnessing van complete parental failure naar protect created not only immediate trauma, maar lasting inability naar trust others, especially authority figures and caregivers. Niet alle kinderen bleven in Lou's beweging. Some escaped, though escape is a strong word, omdat most waren too young naar leave independently. What actually happened was that circumstances changed that allowed or forced them naar exit. Scenario 1. Parents left de beweging. The most common way kinderen left was wanneer hun parents finally woke up and left. Deze usually happened after some crisis. A child becoming seriously ill and parents defying Lou naar seek medical care. Lou making a demand so extreme that zelfs deeply indoctrinated parents couldn't comply. Parents gradually seeing contradictions between Lou's teachings and reality. Witte and Anna, the parents van Karel, the baby die died, left shortly after hun son's death. They had other kinderen who thus exited the movement. Deze kinderen were young genoeg that they didn't retain strong memories van cult life, maar they grew up in a family shattered door grief and guilt, which created its own trauma. Ian's family left in 1964 after the father realized that al zijn business earnings waren going naar Lou and zijn children were malnourished, terwijl Lou ate well. Deze act van leaving was incredibly difficult, omdat it meant admitting years van mistakes, facing shame, and rebuilding life from scratch. Scenario 2. Child Protective Services intervened. In rare cases, outside authorities forced kinderen's removal. Sophie's case, where she was forcibly removed naar een hospital for acute appendicitis, resulted in temporary removal from het Witte Huis. Authorities attempted naar assess whether she should be returned naar haar parents. Ultimately she was, maar met warnings that further medical neglect would result in permanent removal. Deze interventions were rare omdat het Witte Huis was in Muiderberg, somewhat isolated, and authorities in jaren 50s and 60s were less likely now intervene in families except in extreme cases. Ook, cult members were good at hiding problems when outsiders were around. Scenario 3. Kinderen aged out and left as teenagers shut young adults. Some kinderen, as they reached adolescence, began to question what they'd been taught. Contact met outside world, even minimal contact at schools of a neighborhood, exposed them their alternative viewpoints. They realized other families didn't live like theirs, that other belief systems existed, that maybe Lou wasn't actually God. Leaving as Ian teenager was incredibly difficult. You had nowhere to go, no resources, often minimal education. A young man, Hans, left at age 17 after being beaten door one van Lou's enforcers. I slept in parks, did odd jobs, struggled for years. Maar I couldn't stay because I knew if I did, I'd be trapped forever. Young women had particular difficulty leaving omdat they were often targeted for Lou's sexual attention as they reached adolescence. Ian woman, Lisa, reports that when she turned 15, Lou began blessing her in ways that felt sexual. She told her mother, who said it was honor near be noticed door God. Lisa ran away at 16, lived met distant relatives who weren't in the cult, and never returned. Scenario 4. Lou's death ended the movement. Sort of. When Lou died in 1968, the movement didn't immediately dissolve, maar het began splintering. Some families left immediately, freed door the fact that the man who held all authority was gone. Kinderen in deze families exited not because they chose, but because their parents did. Other families stayed met Mien and eventually moved naar Spain. Kinderen in deze families remained in cult environment into jaren 70s and even 80s. Some van deze kinderen are among the last believers still waiting in Figueres as elderly adults today. The challenges van exiting. Regardless van how kinderen exited, the transition was traumatic. They left behind everything familiar, the only community they'd known, friends, sometimes siblings who stayed. They entered Ian world they'd been taught was evil and dangerous. They had educational gaps. social skill deficits, psychological damage that wasn't immediately apparent. Many struggled enormously. Some developed substance abuse problems as adults, self-medicating trauma they didn't know how to process. Others had difficulty forming stable relationships that their models for relationships were so dysfunctional. Some cycled through jobs that they'd never learned normal workplace behaviors, and few did remarkably well, testament not human resilience. They pursued education aggressively, determined not make up for what they'd missed. They sought therapy, joined support groups for cult survivors, worked hard not deprogrammed themselves. But even these success stories carry scars. Today, in 2025, de kinderen who grew up in het Witte Huis zijn in hun 60s and 70s. They've lived more van hun life outside the cult than in het, but the effects van hun childhood persist in complex ways. Ongoing psychological struggles. Many report chronic anxiety, hypervigilance, difficulty trusting others. These zijn classic symptoms van complex PTSD, which results from prolonged trauma during developmental years. One former member describes always feeling on edge, always scanning for danger, never fully relaxing even in safe situations. Depression is common, the realization in adulthood from just how much was stolen from them. Normal childhood, education, healthy relationships can be crushing. Ian woman in her late 60s describes waves van grief for the child she was, for the innocence that was taken, for the normal life she never had. Some struggle met authority. Having been subject naar absolute arbitrary authority as kinderen, they either reflexively submit naar authority figures even when they shouldn't, of rebel against all authority even when cooperation would serve them better. Finding healthy balance is difficult. Relationship difficulties. Many former child members report struggling met intimacy, growing up without healthy relationship models, without learning appropriate boundaries, without secure attachment naar caregivers makes forming healthy adult relationships challenging. Some married multiple times, unable naar make relationships work. Others never married, too afraid van closeness. One man describes deliberately staying single because I don't know how naar be in a relationship without it being about control and submission. That's all I saw growing up. Parenting their own kinderen brought particular challenges. Many were terrified van repeating their parents' mistakes. Some overcompensated door being excessively permissive. Others found themselves falling into authoritarian patterns despite swearing they never would. Most sought therapy before becoming parents, determined not to break the cycle. Religious and spiritual struggles. Unsurprisingly, many former child members have complicated relationships met religion. Some became adamantly atheist. Associating all religious belief met lose manipulation. Others sought out mainstream religious communities, hungry for healthy spirituality, na replace the toxic version they experienced. In few converted naar religions dramatically different from Christianity, Buddhism for example, as way not explore spirituality without triggering cult-related trauma. One woman explains, I still feel spiritual longing, but anything that looks like Western religion triggers me. Buddhism felt safe, omdat it was so different from what Lu taught. Educational and professional outcomes. The educational gaps many kinderen had resulted in varied adult outcomes. Some never pursued higher education, believing themselves too far behind naar catch-up. They worked blue-collar jobs, often successfully, but always carried regret about what might have been. Others pursued education obsessively, as if each degree earned was revenge taken lieu for trying not keep them ignorant. A man who left at 17 with barely elementary school education eventually earned a PhD in psychology, specializing in cult trauma. His dissertation was titled Childhood Indoctrination, Long-Term Psychological Effects van Growing Up in High Control Groups, Relationship Met Remaining Believers. For kinderen whose parents of siblings remained in the movement, particularly those who went naar Spain met mien, family relationships were often permanently fractured. Some have siblings they haven't spoken to in 40 years because the sibling still believes Lou was God and sees the former member as betrayer. Others maintain awkward contact, carefully avoiding certain topics. One man describes visits met an elderly mother who lives in Figueres, still waiting for Lou's return. We talk about weather, about her health. We don't talk about the past. She knows I don't believe. I know she does. It's like this wall between us made van everything we can't say. Financial impacts. Many kinderen inherited nothing omdat their parents donated everything naar Lou. Family wealth that should have been passed down naar support education, first homes, retirement. All van that was gone, donated naar een charlatan. One woman bitterly notes, "My grandfather built a successful business. My father inherited het and gaf het all naar Lou. I inherited nothing but trauma. That's my family legacy. 3 generations destroyed door one man's lie." Physical health impacts. The medical neglect many experienced as kinderen left lasting effects. Multiple former members have chronic health conditions that could have been prevented if mitigated met proper childhood care. Dental problems, vision issues, hearing loss, untreated chronic illnesses. These became lifelong burdens. Additionally, the chronic stress van cult childhood takes toll on physical health. Studies show childhood trauma increases risk for numerous health problems in adulthood. Heart disease, autoimmune disorders, chronic pain. Many former members struggle met these issues. Finding community and healing. In recent years, some former child members have connected met each other, forming Ian's support network. These connections are precious. Who else can truly understand what it was like now grow up in Lou's cult? Who else knows that particular combination van shame, anger, grief, and strange nostalgia for aspects van cult life that were, in twisted way, communal and meaningful? Several have participated in recorded interviews for researchers studying cult impact. Some have written memoirs of essays, and few have become advocates for children's rights, working met organizations that seek naar identify and help kinderen currently trapped in high control groups. Deze advocacy is their way van finding meaning in hun suffering, van ensuring their experience serves some purpose in protecting future kinderen. The question van forgiveness. Many struggle met whether not forgive their parents. On one hand, their parents were victims too, indoctrinated and manipulated. On the other hand, parents have responsibility not protect their kinderen, and deze parents failed that responsibility catastrophically. Some have reached forgiveness, understanding their parents did best they could within impossible circumstances. Others remain angry, feeling that they were adults. They should have known better. They chose Lou over us. Ian few maintain no contact, unable now have relationship met parents who never acknowledged or apologized for the harm they caused. De kinderen die opgroeiden in het Witte Huis. 40 naar 60 kinderen over ongeveer 25 years, geboren in of gebracht naar een cult zonder their choice. Their childhoods were filled niet met play, learning, growth and security zoals childhood should be, maar met indoctrination, deprivation, trauma and fear. Now they zijn in hun 60s and 70s. Some have built good lives despite what was done naar them. Others still struggle daily met the effects van childhood in een cult. All carry scars. All had their childhood stolen door Lude Pallingboor's grandiose delusion and hun parents' tragic willingness naar sacrifice their kinderen naar dat delusion. Their stories matter omdat childhood in cults is not historical curiosity. It happens today, in Netherlands and around the world. Kinderen are still being born in of brought naar high control groups where they are indoctrinated, isolated, sometimes abused, always deprived van normal childhood. Als je found value in deze verhalen, abonneer op dit kanaal. Laat een like achter. Deel deze video. The adults who joined Lou's movement made choices, however manipulated those choices were. But the kinderen had no choice. Telling their stories honors their suffering and might help others recognize and respond when kinderen are being harmed door cult involvement. De kinderen van het Witte Huis verdienden better. All kinderen deserve better. En we hebben de responsibility naar protect them. Bedankt voor kijken. Remember, kinderen can't consent naar cult membership. Adults must protect them, zelfs from their own parents when necessary.